We're at a really good point now to start talking about how to load our weapon. Now, of course, we're still in a dry fire environment here, so I'm not going to introduce any live ammunition to this environment. I've still got my rifle flagged, it's cleared. I'm going to use a magazine that's cleared. It's always a good habit to buddy check if you've got a buddy working with you. And then I'm going to use some dummy rounds. There's a few different dummy rounds that I have. One of them are these Magpul polymer rounds, which they're pretty good. I like them and dislike them. One of the upsides is that since it's a polymer material, it's softer than the parts of my weapon, so it's less likely to cause damage. The bad part is it's black. It's really easy to lose on the range. Then there's these zoom caps. You can get them from Cabela's or Bass Pro. They're one-piece billet. They're metal. They're a bit more durable, and they're a little easier to see. The downside is they're quite a bit more expensive. I do prefer to use one-piece billet material. I don't want parts breaking off, and I've seen some really exotic malfunctions with some of the multiple-piece or homemade dummy rounds. So I don't recommend using any homemade or fired brass or anything like that. Just one-piece billet material works really great. Now, if you've never loaded a magazine before, this is how to do it. You're going to hold the magazine with a curvature facing away from you. You may notice on the follower, there's an indentation here that almost looks a little bit like a round. Now, of course, pointy end's facing away from you, so curvature facing away, pointy end facing away, and the primer facing back towards you. I'm just going to take my thumb, press a little bit of pressure down, and pull traction back to get it to seat backwards. Then I'm going to load it down, next one again, and another. I'm just going to put 3 rounds in here, just like that. Once you're done, you could take it and tap it a little bit. We want the primers, the back of the rounds, to seat all the way in the back of the magazine. Just like that. So there's loading your magazine. Now that we've loaded our magazine, let's talk about actually putting it in our rifle. Now, I like to move people on to loading in a practical position as soon as possible. But before we do this in the prone, let's just go ahead and do it. You can do this standing, seated, or kneeling. Now, let's pick up our rifle. Again, we always want to handle our weapon with both hands if at all possible. I'm just going to go ahead and use my sling so that I keep a good grip on it. Now, the first part of loading our weapon is always clearing it, right? So we're going to confirm that it's on safe. I'm going to remove my chamber flag. And then I'm going to do my 3-point safety check. Chamber, source of feed, bolt face. Again, I'm not just checking for ammunition. I'm checking to make sure that there's no obstructions in this area that's going to prevent the rounds from feeding or cause a malfunction. Very important. Then, I'm going to take the magazine and I'm going to push it into the magazine well. I don't want to slap it. Notice my bolt is to the rear. This is how I teach operating the weapon, from the bolt open position when I load it. And then I'm going to pull it down. The reason I don't want to slap up is with the bolt to the rear, if I slap really hard, it's possible to get the rounds to pop out and then I can cause a double feed during the loading process. So I push, pull. Pulling is what confirms that the magazine is seated. I can slap all day long, but pulling down is what confirms it. My firing hand then returns to my pistol grip. The next thing that happens is I'm going to go ahead and press the bolt release. Okay? Bolt goes forward. Then tap the forward assist and close the dust cover. The weapon's now loaded. Now let's unload our weapon. Of course, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we can place the weapon on safe. Attempt to place it on safe. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the source of feed. Just let it drop. Okay, there's no need to move your hand out and try to catch it. I'm just going to control the weapon with both hands. I'm then going to trap the buttstock underneath my arm and pull it back to give me some leverage and control over the weapon. I'm then going to take my non-firing hand, rotate it back towards the magazine well, placing my thumb on the lower portion of the bolt release, which catches the bolt. Then take my forefinger and middle finger and sharply pull the charging handle to the rear, observing where the round goes. Make no attempt to direct it or catch it. Return the charging handle forward, and now I'm going to do my 3-point safety check. Chamber, source of feed, bolt face. Weapon's now clear. At this time, I could go ahead and choose to place my bolt flag back in, or chamber flag back in, or I could let my bolt go forward and close the dust cover. There's really no need to ease springs or anything like that unless you're going to store for long periods of time. So there we go, that's load and unload. Now that we're comfortable with that, let's go ahead and apply it into a practical position, which is our prone position. Since we're going to be firing from this first, we really need to know how to load and unload the weapon from the position we're going to be employing it. So I'm going to go ahead and get down and assume a good position here. And I'm going to go ahead and remove my chamber flag. Now, I'm just going to take this magazine and move it off here to my support side because that's what I'm going to be loading with. I'm then going to rotate up into my position. Then I'm going to go ahead and rotate the weapon slightly so that the magazine well points towards where the magazine's coming from, and watch the magazine come in, push, pull to seat. Support hand then comes back up, slaps the bolt release, bolt goes forward. My non-firing hand now can move forward to my support position, tap the forward assist, close the dust cover. So now I've loaded. Now let's go ahead and unload. Same thing. Weapon on safe, source of feed goes out. In this prone position, you may find it necessary to assist the magazine out a little bit if it hits the ground. Non-firing hand comes back to the bolt catch. Firing hand comes up, pulls the bolt sharply to the rear. You may find that this is a little bit of a difficult pull to get it to the rear. Okay, just work with it a little bit. If necessary, you might want to extend the buttstock just a little bit until you get the hang of it. Charging handle then comes forward. 3-point safety check. So I just rotate the weapon and I check the chamber, source of feed, bolt face. Notice at all times the weapon remained oriented in the safe direction. I didn't have any extraneous movements. Now I can go ahead and take my chamber flag, place it back in. So there we go. Load, unload. Let's add malfunctions to the list of drills we need to practice. Before we continue, anytime you encounter a problem with your weapon or you don't understand what you're doing, just stop. Attempt to place the weapon on safe, set it down, and point it in a safe direction. Then seek some assistance from an instructor, a range safety officer, or a qualified armor. There's no need to get yourself into a situation where you cause an accident. Also, everybody likes to move fast. Everybody wants to impress their buddy. But nobody's going to be impressed if you have an accidental discharge where you do something that makes yourself look silly. If you really want to speed things up, you just need to learn how to do things smoother and sooner. And the way to do that is to slow down. You need to build good muscle memory. There's absolutely nothing wrong when you start to move at a very, very slow pace. There's nothing wrong with stopping in between each step and thinking about the next step you have to do. Or even saying it out loud. Or write it down on a sheet of paper and have a buddy read it to you and go by the numbers. There's nothing wrong with this. Remember, repetition doesn't build perfection. Perfect repetition builds perfection. So make sure each time you do this, you're trying to do it perfectly. So to start this off, let's talk about the methods I teach. Now, as training progresses, I do introduce some more techniques that may cut out some steps or do some things sooner or skip some things over. But there's a reason for that. And also, at that point, I expect you to understand why we're skipping over those steps and when you can skip over those steps. Okay? So to do that, you've got to understand those steps you're skipping over and why we're doing that. So before we do that, you've got to build up a good basic fundamental. And the best fundamentals to build this with are just the conventional sports method and remedial action. Same thing the Army teaches. And the reason they teach it is because it works. Yeah, there's some steps in there that you could cut out, but unless you know why you're cutting them out, you could put yourself into a situation where you're performing some actions that make the malfunction worse or cause you to lose that firefight. So we're going to stick with the basics right now. Also, I teach strong hand and weak hand manipulation. Okay? So when I'm manipulating the charging handle, I'm doing it with the firing hand. And there's specific reasons for that. So that I'm leaving myself into a position where if I need to escalate my corrective action to clear a malfunction, my hands are in the proper position. Remember, these aren't range drills, okay? I'm not trying to save some efficiency on the pro timer. I want to make sure that my hands are in a position to where if I encounter something that my immediate action won't fix, I can correct it and continue on, okay? So that's just an example of some of those techniques that work really well and look cool out on the range, but they may not work that well in a combat situation where you have someone firing back at you. We want to stick with positive measures that are sure to clear the malfunction that we encounter. So let's start that off. Sports. Sports is an acronym that the Army uses. Okay, each of the letters in the word stands for something. It's slap, pull, observe, release, tap, squeeze. So let's set this up and talk ourselves through it. So I've got my weapon here. It's flagged. I've got my magazine with some dummy rounds in it. I'm going to go ahead and pick up my weapon and clear it. And I'm going to load it. Now let's talk through it. I modify the S, the slap portion, a little bit. So S is slap the magazine. Now I add to this a little bit because remember, I can slap up on this magazine all day long and it doesn't confirm that it's locked. So I'm going to slap and then pull. I'm slapping just in case this magazine isn't seated and it caused the rounds not to feed in, okay? And then I'm going to pull down to make sure that it's locked into place. Then I rotate my non-firing hand back up on the magazine well. And that's because I want my thumb to be in a position to where if I need to, I can rotate it to the bolt catch so I can lock the bolt to the rear. And that's for a later task where I may go ahead and lock the bolt to the rear and do remedial action during this drill. But for right now, let's just keep our hand in that position. Then the P, pull, I'm going to pull the charging handle to the rear and observe, okay? I'm observing to see if a round ejects. Now, later, if we see something wrong, we may stop and lock the bolt to the rear in this position and continue with remedial action. But for right now, let's just treat it as a drill all in itself. Pull, observe. Then I release cleanly, don't ride the charging handle forward. Then tap the forward assist, and then we're going to re-squeeze the weapon, refire. So, sports. Now, for a well-maintained weapon, you know, shooting good ammunition, usually sports will clear most of the problems. Now, you probably saw some steps in there that we could cut out, but until we build up that memory of what a bolt forward and fully locked looks like, you know, that we're sure that our magazine's seated in and all these other things, we don't want to skip these steps yet. We want to do a good progressive clear to make sure we've got the best chance that this weapon's going to go bang when we pull the trigger again so we can win that firefight. I hope that makes sense. Now that we've done this a few times in this nice comfortable position, let's go ahead and put that back into practice in our actual position that we're going to use this on the range, which is the prone. So I'm going to go ahead and get back down into my prone position here. And let's go through our firing process and integrate it into this dry fire drill. So pick my weapon up, get into my position, do my natural point of aim drill. Adjust if necessary, recheck. Okay, I'm good to go. So now let's go ahead and dry fire our firing process. So I rotate the selector lever from safe to semi, place my finger on the trigger, and at my natural respiratory pause, I'm going to pull the trigger. Okay, click, no bang. I've got a malfunction. So let's do sports. Finger comes off the trigger. Now, you could attempt to sweep the safety lever. For our purposes right now, I'm not going to worry about it. We're not going to teach tactics at this point. We're in the prone with the weapon face towards the threat with the intent to re-engage. So I'm not going to worry about the safety. Later on, when we're ducking in and out of cover or doing other things, it is necessary to sweep the safety. For right now, let's just not confuse it. Finger comes off the trigger. It's very important. Then I'm going to need to rotate the weapon slightly to the side to gain access to the magazine. I'm going to slap up with my non-firing hand and pull down. Remember, S, slap, pull. Hand then comes back up to the magazine well to keep my thumb into position in case I need to lock the bolt to the rear. Then, firing hand comes up, pulls the charging hand to the rear, observe, release, tap, and then back into firing position and squeeze. So there we go, sports. Right, so what if sports doesn't clear the malfunction? Meaning, we pull the trigger, there's click, no bang, we do the sports clearing process to attempt to clear the malfunction, and then on the last S, the squeeze, we get another click, no bang. Okay, well then we need to move into remedial action. Remedial action is really simple. All it is clearing the weapon with one small difference. What we're going to do is we're going to have to pull the charging handle to the rear and then remove the magazine. Instead of removing the source of feed first, we need to pull the bolt to the rear. The reason for that is there's some malfunctions that you can get that it's going to make it very, very difficult to get that magazine out without relieving some of that tension from the bolt. Okay, so let's talk through how we're going to do this. I'm going to pick up my weapon, flag out, I'm going to load it, clear it, load it. So I'm just going to assume for our purposes right now, I've gone ahead and fired and I've already gone through sports. Okay, so this is my second squeeze and no bang. All I'm going to do right now is I'm going to attempt to place it on safe. Very important right now that we attempt to place the weapon on safe at this point, because we are going to be removing the magazine. There's no reason for this weapon to be on fire at this point. Now, of course, this time the weapon's fired, it's not going to go completely unsafe. Don't worry about that. If it goes unsafe right now, fine. If not, just remember that. We'll address it again here. Now, support hand comes back up and it's in position and presses down on the bolt catch to lock the bolt to the rear. Okay? I'm then going to attempt to pull the charging handle to the rear. Alright? If it doesn't go to the rear, I'm going to release the magazine with my non-firing hand and just continue to hold tension. But let's assume it does lock to the rear. I go ahead and press the bolt catch and attempt to place the charging handle fully forward. If there's an obstruction here, it may not go fully forward. At this point now, the weapon should go on safe. Now, I drop the magazine. It may be necessary to rip the magazine out because there may be some misfed rounds. Now, if you encounter a malfunction where it's necessary to remove the magazine, we should treat that magazine as suspect. Okay? We don't want to reinsert it. Okay, so if we're actually doing combat or tactical drills here, this magazine's place now is going to be on the ground and we're not going to reinsert it. We're going to insert a brand new magazine, and then when we get time, we're going to inspect that magazine to see if there's any damages on it. It's also a good technique that when you're on the range and you're putting rounds through your weapon, once you get a malfunction that requires you to remove a magazine, it's a good idea when you pick it back up to put a paint dot on it. Alright? Once you start to accumulate paint dots, you know, a good rule is if you've already got 2 on there and it happens the 3rd time, that magazine's probably bad. You just need to get rid of it. There's just something wrong with it. So at this point now, what we need to do is just go ahead and clear it. So same thing, I'm going to check my chamber, source of feed, bolt face. If the weapon's really dirty or it's dark, we need to be prepared to insert our small digit in here and check it. Remember, racking the bolt a number of times doesn't do anything to clear obstructions in here. If it's dark and the lights are out, we're under NVGs, we actually need to take something and stick it in here and feel around to see if there's something causing this malfunction. From here, all we're going to do then is go back through our load procedures. We're going to take a new magazine, put it in, hit the bolt release, let it go forward, tap, and then we're going to squeeze on. Does that make sense? Right, so let's put those 2 drills together in our practical position, which is our prone position at this time. Now, of course, it's good to go ahead and start out, you know, dry fire sports a few times, get that to work, then do remedial action a few times. Then once you're comfortable, we build them in together. So I've got my magazine with my 3 rounds again. I'm going to set it down, and I'm going to go ahead and assume a good prone supported position and clear my weapon. And then I'm going to go ahead and load. Okay, let's go through our dry fire process. Natural point of aim. Adjust. Recheck. Safety from safe to fire. Finger on the trigger, breathing. Have my natural respiratory pause squeeze. Okay, click, no bang. Now I'm gonna slowly go through this. Finger off. Slap, pull. Support hand up. Pull, observe. Release. Tap, squeeze. Still, nothing. Support hand back. Lock it to the rear. Safe. Magazine out. Clear. And then reload. Now, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and practice these drills. Alright, so we've covered a lot of drills now. We've done load. We've done unload. We've done clear. We've ran through immediate action or sports. We've done remedial action. So, it's a good time now to go ahead and practice these. We want to get good and comfortable and smooth with them. More importantly, we want to be smooth. We're not trying to rush speed. We just want to be in control when we're doing these. Get comfortable before you go to the range, right? A lot of times our time on the range can be limited. You may have to pay to be there. You may have limited time. You may have to drive to it. And you don't want to waste a lot of rounds. Dry fire is a very, very important task. And it's something that good shooters do. You know, a good rule can be dedicate 10 or 20 minutes each day to nothing but dry fire. You know, when you wake up in the morning or when you go to bed, just find a good safe place in your house or your yard that you can practice these drills in just 10 or 20 minutes every day. It'll make you a better shooter.